On March 15, 2021, Bozeman, Montana woke up to news that shook the entire town. But it wasn't caught on live TV or announced with big headlines. Instead, it unfolded quietly at 6:00 a.m. in the parking lot of Roosevelt Elementary School. That morning, 68-year-old William Hendricks, a man everyone knew as the kind crossing guard who waved at kids and handed out stickers, had just finished setting up orange cones for the school drop-off zone. Suddenly, Detective Lisa Chen approached him. Without a fight or protest, Hendricks listened as she read him his rights. The charge: the murder of Sarah Mitchell, a name that had haunted Bozeman for 34 years. To understand why this single moment changed everything the town thought it knew, we need to go back to February 14, 1987. That Valentine's Day began with the first flakes of what would turn into one of the worst blizzards in Bozeman's history. And if you've followed true crime before, you know, these early hours matter more than most people realize. Sarah Mitchell was just 19 at the time. She was dependable, hardworking, and always on time. That's why Rosie's Diner on North 7th Avenue relied on her to close up shop, especially on Valentine's Day when couples stayed later than usual. Her manager, Helen Kowalski, later told police that Sarah didn't seem herself that evening. She kept glancing at the wall clock and the frost-covered windows as snow piled up outside. The final customer left at 10:23 p.m., and Helen remembered it clearly because she had joked about the holiday ending early. Sarah had only managed a weak smile in return. By 10:45 p.m., the place was cleaned, chairs stacked, and the register balanced. Helen watched Sarah pull her burgundy wool coat tight and step out into the freezing night air. Sarah's car, a 1983 Honda Civic with a rust patch above the back wheel well, was parked in the employee lot. That car had been a graduation gift from her parents, and even though it was old, it never failed to start in Montana winters. But what happened in the short 60 feet between Rosie's back door and that Honda would become a mystery that consumed the next 3 decades. At 11:47 p.m., Jeremy Walsh was driving home from his shift at the lumber mill when his headlights caught something unusual. In the middle of County Road 86, about 3 miles outside of town, Sarah's Honda was sitting with the engine running. The driver's side door hung wide open. The heater was blasting, and the radio quietly played Sarah's favorite late-night country station KBUs. Her brown purse was still on the passenger seat. With her wallet inside and 43 by 67 in cash, the exact amount she'd counted at the end of her shift. Jeremy said he couldn't explain the strange feeling he got when he walked up to the car. The silence felt wrong, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Sarah's coat was crumpled on the driver's seat, still warm, and the keys dangled from the ignition. The only sign of struggle was a single scuff in the snow near the open door, and Sarah's left shoe, a brown leather flat, lying about 15 feet away, partly buried by the falling snow. Sheriff Tom Bradley was in charge back then, though most people knew him more for coaching softball than for solving crimes. With only 8 deputies covering 2,600 square miles, his department wasn't prepared for a case like this, and the mistakes started piling up immediately. Deputy Mark Stevens, barely out of a criminal justice program, reached the scene nearly 47 minutes after Jeremy's 911 call. In the cold and snow, he made decisions that would damage the case forever. He let Jeremy drive Sarah's Honda back into town, which destroyed potential evidence. The scuff mark in the snow vanished under fresh snowfall before it could be photographed, and the freezing temperatures ruined any chance of preserving tire tracks. At 1 a.m., Sarah's parents, Richard and Patricia Mitchell, arrived at the sheriff's office after driving through the storm. Patricia, a math teacher at Bozeman High School, immediately began creating timelines and lists with the precision she used in her classroom. Richard, who worked in the parts department at Morrison Motors, approached it with practical mechanical thinking, asking about search protocols. Neither of them could understand how their daughter could vanish from a running car without anyone noticing. The initial search was brutal. Volunteers fought through snowdrifts up to 4 feet high, shouting Sarah's name into the wind. Search. Dogs brought in from Missoula quickly lost her scent because of the storm and the compromised scene. By February 18th, Sheriff Bradley was under fire from every direction. The Bozeman Daily Chronicle ran daily front-page stories questioning the department's competence. Parents were refusing to let their daughters work night shifts, and local businesses worried that the case would scare away tourists. Bradley needed a suspect, and fast. He focused on 22-year-old Danny Kowalski, Helen's son, who had dated Sarah the summer before. Danny became the prime suspect not because of evidence, but because of desperation. He knew Sarah's schedule, had argued with her in January, and had spent Valentine's night drinking at Murphy's bar. His alibi wasn't airtight, and when questioned, some of his details didn't add up perfectly. To Bradley's inexperienced team, that looked like guilt. On March 3rd, Danny was arrested. The local paper treated him as though he was already convicted. His family hired a public defender from Helena, who was completely overwhelmed. During the preliminary hearing, the weakness of the case became obvious. There was no physical evidence linking Danny to Sarah's car, no witnesses placing him on County Road 86, nothing but suspicion. By July 1987, security footage from Murphy's bar surfaced, proving Danny was there until closing time. The charges were dropped, but the damage was permanent. His life was destroyed, the sheriff's office lost public trust, and Sarah's case went cold. For the next 16 years, the file sat in Sheriff Bradley's office gathering dust. But for Patricia Mitchell, Sarah's mother, the case never rested. Her basement became a command center. She lined the concrete walls with bankers' boxes, each labeled in neat handwriting. Witness statements 1987, physical evidence photos, timeline, discrepancies. The math teacher who once organized her classroom with color-coded charts now spent every night after grading papers working on her daughter's disappearance. The basement smelled of cardboard and photochemicals from pictures she developed herself. She didn't trust anyone else to handle the images. Under humming fluorescent lights, she spread files across a folding table Richard had bought her. A magnifying glass, originally a gift for their 20th anniversary, became her most used tool. A map of Gallatin County hung on the wall, covered in pins. Red for confirmed sightings, blue for unverified tips, yellow for false leads. For Patricia, this was no longer a case. It was her life's work. And for Bozeman, it was a wound that never healed. Patricia Mitchell's heart carried scars from every false lead, but she never gave up. She could name every single pin on the map in her basement by memory, the coordinates, the date, the time, and the witness who had provided the tip. Each year on February 14th, she stood at the spot where Sarah's car had been found. At first, these vigils were small family gatherings, but over time they grew into public events that drew crowds and even reporters from as far away as Denver. Patricia always brought fresh flowers and battery-powered lanterns, her breath visible in the icy winter air as she read passages from the journal she had kept since 1987. Local TV crews came in the early years and treated these memorials with care, but as time passed, the reporters seemed younger and less connected. They treated Sarah's story like just another yearly assignment instead of an unsolved tragedy. The strain of decades of grief slowly eroded Patricia's marriage. Richard never spoke openly about it, but the signs were obvious. He stopped asking about what she was doing in the basement. He learned to sleep through the sound of her pacing late into the night. Eventually, he moved to the guest bedroom so he wouldn't be disturbed when she slipped into bed after spending hours reviewing case files. The conversations that had once been filled with Sarah's college dreams and weekend plans turned into simple discussions about house repairs or school schedules. Her relationship with law enforcement followed its own pattern. At first, she called Sheriff Tom Bradley once a week, then every other week, then once a month. After his retirement, Sheriff Janet Carlson took over, and Patricia hoped the new leadership would finally bring movement. Instead, she received polite reassurances and promises of review that never went anywhere. Within the department, her reputation shifted from heartbroken mother to persistent problem, and soon deputies stopped returning her calls altogether. That didn't stop Patricia. The boxes in her basement multiplied. She drove hundreds of miles to interview inmates who claimed they knew what happened to Sarah, only to be met with demands for money or cigarettes in exchange for useless stories. She wrote letters to psychics, private investigators, and strangers who read about the case and wanted to help. Patricia carefully recorded every single interaction, hoping one might turn out to be real. By 2005, her obsession had taken a heavy toll. Friends drifted away because every conversation ended up circling back to Sarah's case. Even her sister Margaret began skipping holiday gatherings, knowing Patricia would corner guests to share her theories. The woman who had once been known for her warmth and humor was now seen with quiet pity, or worse, avoided altogether in the grocery store aisles. The decades after Sarah's disappearance became a magnet for drifters, liars, and attention seekers. Each new tip raised hope, and each collapse deepened the pain. When Sheriff Carlson inherited the case, she also inherited filing cabinets stuffed with false confessions, fabricated sightings, and elaborate conspiracy theories. In 1992, a drifter named Marcus Webb called from a jail cell in Billings and claimed he had witnessed Sarah's abduction while camping illegally near County Road 86. Webb's account included details about the snowy night and even described a dark pickup truck with Montana plates and a driver in a baseball cap. It sounded believable, until records revealed that Webb had actually been incarcerated in Wyoming on February 14, 1987. He had memorized details from newspaper articles during his earlier jail time. The arrival of the internet in the mid-1990s made things even worse. Amateur sleuths using names like Montana Truth Seeker and Cold Case Expert bombarded law enforcement with theories. They linked Sarah's disappearance to everything from human trafficking to satanic cults. One persistent online researcher even spent 3 years trying to tie her case to a series of Nevada highway murders, producing hundreds of pages of irrelevant but thorough analysis. Out of all the false suspects, Robert "Bobby" Hutchins seemed the most convincing. He was a former carnival worker with a record of assaults, and in the winter of 1987 he had been in Bozeman doing construction jobs while living in a trailer park outside of town. People placed him at the same diners and bars Sarah had visited, and his habit of leaving towns quickly after trouble made his timeline suspicious. Investigators spent 8 months tracking him across 6 states, only for payroll records to prove he had been working a night shift in Missoula on February 14th. Technology that was supposed to bring answers only added frustration. CODIS, the FBI's DNA database, gave investigators hope, but when they submitted samples from Sarah's car, the results came back useless. The evidence had been improperly stored in the 1980s and had deteriorated. Attempts to enhance old 911 recordings with digital tools produced nothing more than static and background chatter. The most crushing blow came in 2008. Construction workers discovered human remains in Hyalite Canyon. Patricia rushed to the scene, convinced she would finally be able to lay Sarah to rest after 21 years. Instead, investigators confirmed the bones belonged to a 40-year-old man. Patricia collapsed in Richard's arms, her grief renewed by the cruel rise and fall of hope. Psychics added their own layer of false hope. Over the years, 17 different psychics offered visions of Sarah. Some said she was in underground tunnels, others claimed to speak to her spirit. The most elaborate came in 2010, when a self-proclaimed medium from California convinced Patricia to fund a week-long search of abandoned mine shafts. Nothing was found. Detective Carlson kept records of all of these, not because she believed them, but because she knew families like the Mitchells would pursue them with or without official support. Every false lead wore down the Mitchell family a little more. Every dead end left the case file thicker, the evidence room more cluttered, and the community more resigned. It was a growing archive of broken hopes. Then came Earl Hutchinson. For 16 years he had carried the memory of what he saw on February 14, 1987. Only when lung cancer began to take his life did he finally speak up. Earl was 64, a lifelong mechanic who spent 4 decades fixing trucks and farm equipment. He was respected as an honest man whose word meant something, which made his confession all the more devastating. Earl owned a small garage outside Bozeman. Farmers brought him the jobs bigger shops didn't want, and most deals were sealed with a handshake. His shop smelled of oil and coffee, the concrete floor darkened by decades of grease. He made enough to raise his wife Martha and their 3 kids, though the place never modernized. No cameras, no computerized logs. On the night Sarah disappeared, Earl had been working late on a combine harvester. His garage sat about 2 miles from County Road 86, angled just right so he could see the intersection where the road met Highway 191. Earl had a habit of stepping outside every few hours to clear his lungs of fumes. Around 11:30 p.m., he noticed headlights moving oddly along County Road 86. The vehicle stopped and started several times, behavior that didn't fit the straight stretch of road most people drove smoothly even in the snow. He kept watching, uneasy, not realizing that what he saw would connect him forever to Bozeman's darkest mystery. Earl had been staring out from his garage on that snowy night when something unusual caught his attention. Through the heavy curtain of falling snow, he noticed the shape of a pickup truck pulled over on County Road 86. The weather was so bad that he couldn't make out clear details, but what happened next stayed in his mind for the next 16 years. A second set of headlights suddenly appeared, this time moving much faster toward the stopped truck. The approaching vehicle looked smaller, maybe a sedan or compact car, and its strange weaving suggested either the car was having problems or the driver was in distress. Earl sat frozen as the two vehicles drew closer, their headlights cutting through the snow and crossing each other like shifting beams of light. For a moment, it looked almost like patterns dancing in the storm. The encounter lasted no more than 3 or 4 minutes. Earl saw movement near the vehicles, possibly people, but the worsening storm blurred everything. When the snowfall eased for a moment, only one car remained. The smaller vehicle had disappeared, and the other one drove away toward town at a steady, normal pace. At first, Earl thought it was just a strange roadside moment not worth mentioning, but the very next day, when news spread that Sarah Mitchell's abandoned Honda had been found on that same stretch of road, his stomach sank. Suddenly, what he had seen might be the key to a crime. The thought terrified him. He realized his testimony could make him the only witness to what happened that night, and that knowledge left him scared of drawing dangerous attention to himself. As weeks turned into months, Earl convinced himself that what he saw couldn't really help. He reminded himself over and over that visibility had been poor, that he couldn't identify license plates, faces, or exact actions. The longer he stayed quiet, the harder it became to speak up without people asking why he had waited so long. It wasn't until October 15, 2003, 3 weeks after being diagnosed with cancer and only 2 days after doctors told him he had around 6 months left, that Earl finally picked up the phone. His voice shook with emotion and weakness as he told Detective Carson about that night. He described the headlights, the movement, the snow. His words were broken up by heavy coughing fits that reminded Carson of the urgency of time. Carson immediately drove out to see him and found Earl sitting in the same chair in his garage where, without realizing it, he had witnessed Sarah's final moments. Earl died on December 3, 2003, before investigators could arrange a proper, detailed interview that might have pulled more information from his memory. His death closed the best lead the case had seen in more than a decade, leaving investigators with unanswered questions. Years later, in the summer of 2019, a new face entered the investigation. Detective Lisa Chen, 38 years old, had just moved from Seattle to Bozeman. With her master's degree in forensic science and years of experience in cold cases, she wanted to work somewhere smaller where her efforts could really make an impact. When she opened Sarah Mitchell's files for the first time in the basement evidence room of Gallatin County Sheriff's Department, she immediately saw the problems. Old evidence from 1987 had been stored under outdated protocols, nowhere near modern forensic standards. Many items that could have been tested for DNA had been contaminated or mishandled. But then Chen spotted something overlooked for 32 years. In photos of Sarah's abandoned Honda, she noticed a simple coffee cup collected from the cup holder. Investigators back then must have assumed it was Sarah's, and it had been sealed in a paper bag and forgotten. Realizing its potential, Chen sent it to the Montana State Crime Lab, hoping some trace of saliva might still remain. 6 weeks later, the results came back. The cup held DNA from 2 people. One matched Sarah's, and the other belonged to an unknown male. The male DNA was entered into CODIS, the national DNA database, but no matches were found. That meant Sarah's abductor had either never been arrested for a felony requiring DNA collection, or the crime happened before DNA tracking became standard. Chen knew the usual paths had reached their limit, so she turned to a groundbreaking tool: forensic genetic genealogy. By comparing crime scene DNA with consumer genealogy databases, investigators could identify suspects through relatives who had submitted their DNA for ancestry purposes. The process wasn't easy. The DNA from the coffee cup was old and degraded, but private labs had developed techniques to rebuild even the smallest fragments. A specialized lab in Virginia began working on the sample, running 4 months of computer analysis to construct family trees. On January 23, 2020, Chen finally got the email she'd been waiting for. The results pointed to the Hendricks family tree, specifically linking to William Hendricks, a man who had lived in Bozeman since 1975. To the community, Hendricks was known as a trusted crossing guard at the elementary school, but the genealogy data revealed something different. His DNA matched the unknown male from Sarah's car. Chen spent the following weeks quietly investigating him, collecting discarded cups and cigarette butts to confirm the match. Every test confirmed it. Digging further, she discovered Hendricks had also worked as a night janitor at the high school back in 1987, the same year Sarah disappeared. This job gave him full access to the grounds and knowledge of student routines. His position in the community had allowed him to move unnoticed for decades. The connection to Hendricks was uncovered through the work of Dr. Rebecca Torres, the forensic genealogist assisting Chen. Torres explained that solving the case was like piecing together a giant jigsaw puzzle where most pieces were missing, but enough of the picture eventually appeared. The first breakthrough came when the unknown DNA connected to a woman named Margaret Hendricks, who had uploaded her profile years earlier to trace her Irish heritage. Her results suggested the unknown man was either her brother, uncle, or male cousin. Torres then built a mirror tree, mapping out 4 generations of the Hendricks family using birth records, marriage certificates, and census data. She coordinated with historians and genealogy experts across Montana to verify each branch. The Hendricks family had moved to Montana in the 1940s, when Margaret's grandfather, Thomas Hendricks, came west to work for the railroad. By the late 1960s, the family was well established across the state, and within that network sat William Hendricks, the man now tied by DNA to Sarah Mitchell's disappearance. When Sarah Mitchell vanished, Detective Chen turned her attention to family photographs that Margaret had uploaded to her ancestry profile. She carefully studied the faces of men who might have been living near Bozeman in February 1987. Looking at birthday parties, weddings, and holiday pictures, Chen felt unsettled knowing she could be staring at the face of Sarah's killer hidden among smiling relatives. The genealogy search pointed to 5 possible male suspects who matched the right age and location. Chen went through each one, crossing them off based on alibis, health records that showed they couldn't physically commit the crime, or confirmed deaths before 1987. Weeks of detailed work passed, and for the first time in 34 years it seemed like someone might finally uncover what had happened to Sarah. One name rose above the rest: William Thomas Hendricks. Born in 1952, he was 35 at the time of Sarah's disappearance. Exactly the age experts said matched the profile of predators who commit these crimes. His work history was troubling. He had jobs that gave him direct access to young people and their schedules. During the 1980s, he worked nights as a janitor at Bozeman High School. That meant he had keys to nearly every building in the district and easy access to information about students. Chen discovered that his janitorial duties included cleaning the guidance counselor's office, where employment paperwork was often thrown away. This may have given Hendricks access to Sarah's work schedule at Rosie's Diner. Suddenly, the pieces fit together. He could have followed her routine, learned her vulnerabilities, and planned the attack. After Hendricks left the high school in 1991, he reinvented himself as a community figure. He became a school crossing guard, standing in front of elementary schools each morning in his orange safety vest, earning parents' trust while still being close to children. On the surface, He looked like a helpful neighbor and devoted family man, but the DNA evidence connected him directly to Sarah's case. Chen knew the science was solid, yet she also understood that prosecutors would need a full picture of who Hendricks was to convince a jury. She began following him quietly while also digging into unsolved cases involving other missing women in Montana. It was possible Sarah wasn't his only victim. What haunted Chen the most was how Hendricks had managed to live a completely ordinary life, while Sarah's mother, Patricia, spent decades searching for her daughter. Every night, Patricia went to her basement looking for clues while the man, responsible for her grief-attended barbecues, tended to his garden and greeted children at crosswalks. By February 28, 2021, Chen's desk was covered with surveillance photos. They showed Hendricks living his usual quiet routine, helping kids cross North 7th Avenue in the morning light, drinking coffee on his porch while reading the Bozeman Daily Chronicle, maintaining his yard and garden. To his neighbors, he was a trusted figure who had lived in the same blue ranch-style home on Elm Street since 1979. His truck had an elementary school parking permit, his mailbox carried a faded Montana State University sticker, and every August, he shared homegrown tomatoes with older neighbors. On the outside, he was the picture of community responsibility. But the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit painted a darker truth. Hendricks fit the category of offenders who live double lives, outwardly normal, secretly predatory. He had a talent for self-control and manipulation, which allowed him to remain hidden for more than 30 years. He even befriended police officers by dropping off holiday cookies baked by his wife Dorothy or chatting about traffic safety. Deputies thought of him as a friend, which made his arrest even more painful. The most disturbing discovery was that Hendricks had joined the original search parties for Sarah back in February 1987. Volunteer records listed him as one of the people combing through snowy fields calling her name, while knowing exactly where her body was. Photographs from those searches showed him standing with other volunteers, his face appearing sympathetic at the time, but now revealing something far more sinister. Dorothy Hendricks, his wife of 42 years, later told investigators she had never once suspected him of wrongdoing. To her, he was a reliable husband, but behind their marriage was strict control. He kept secrets about his time, movements, and activities. What she thought was loyalty was in fact a carefully maintained performance. Parents across Bozeman were shaken to learn that for decades they had trusted their children to a man who murdered Sarah and then continued working with kids at schools, church groups, Little League, and summer camps. His files were filled with glowing recommendations praising his dedication. Nobody realized they were praising a killer who had hidden in plain sight. When the time came to arrest him, body cameras recorded the moment. Hendricks showed no shock and no resistance when Chen approached him in the school parking lot. His calm expression seemed to say he had been expecting this for years. Parents who had once waved to him from their cars now struggled to accept that the man who protected their kids at intersections had destroyed another family's daughter. His betrayal was bigger than one crime. It shook the trust of the entire community. In the interrogation room at Gallatin County Sheriff's Department, Hendricks finally dropped the mask he had worn for 34 years. The room, marked with decades of scars on the metal table, became the place where he ended decades of lies. He chose not to call an attorney. Instead, he looked at Chen and explained in a steady voice that he had been waiting for this moment for over 3 decades. Detective Chen stayed calm as he reached for the paper cup of coffee that Chen had handed him. His voice carried the same steady tone that hundreds of children had once connected with feelings of safety and protection. Hendricks began his confession by mentioning February 14, 1987, but quickly made it clear that Sarah Mitchell's death was not some sudden act. It was the result of months of planning and quiet observation. As the night janitor at Bozeman High School, Hendricks had access to school records, student schedules, and work-study details. These gave him the chance to track possible victims with the patience of a predator who knew careful preparation was the key to success. He explained that he first noticed Sarah during a basketball game in January 1987 while cleaning the gym after the event. Her laugh, he said, triggered disturbing fantasies that grew stronger with time. Over the next several weeks, he mapped out her work routine by driving past Rosie's diner, checking when her car was parked outside, and predicting the routes she might take home. When the night of the abduction came, Hendricks found it easier than expected. He parked his pickup on County Road 86, with the hood raised to look like his truck had broken down. Sarah stopped to help, a small-town act of kindness taught by her parents. Hendricks then struck her with a tire iron, knocking her unconscious, and loaded her into his truck. The entire abduction took less than 3 minutes, carried out with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed it many times. He told Chen that he drove Sarah to an abandoned copper mine, about 27 miles northeast of Bozeman. He had scouted the area before and chosen the site because it was remote and hidden. It became the place where he kept Sarah, describing it as a location for what he chillingly called extended interaction. The psychological evaluation after his confession revealed a disturbing personality. Dr. Amanda Foster, the forensic psychologist who interviewed Hendricks in 6 separate sessions, reported that he showed clear signs of narcissistic personality disorder along with psychopathic traits. This allowed him to separate his violent behavior from his everyday life, functioning normally at work and in social settings, while secretly harboring violent fantasies. His ability to blend in made it almost impossible for police to catch him with normal methods. Hendricks admitted that after Sarah's murder, he inserted himself into the community's search efforts. He attended vigils, volunteered in searches, and gathered information about the police investigation, all while taking satisfaction in knowing he was fooling everyone. For 12 years, he even stood beside Sarah's mother, Patricia, at annual vigils, silently knowing where Sarah's remains were hidden. The mine location, Hendricks finally revealed, would require expert teams to recover the body. Specialized crews trained to work in confined spaces would need to handle the recovery, ensuring Sarah could finally be brought home to her family. On September 18, 2021, Hendricks entered his guilty plea in a courtroom filled with townspeople. Patricia Mitchell sat in the front row, her hands neatly folded just like the way she had organized files and evidence in her basement for decades. For her, it was the moment she had waited for, though it came at a heavy price. Judge Margaret Thompson, with over 20 years of experience on the bench, said she had never faced a case that carried such weight. Hendricks had been trusted with the safety of thousands of children, had volunteered in community events, and had earned the respect of neighbors, all while hiding the fact that he had murdered Sarah Mitchell. During sentencing, the victim impact statements revealed just how deeply the crime had torn lives apart. Patricia described how her obsession with the case destroyed her marriage and distanced her from family and friends. Her basement became a shrine of files, timelines, and notes, a lifelong search that consumed her adulthood. Richard Mitchell, Sarah's father, spoke of years of fading hope, the pain of losing his daughter, and the loneliness of watching his wife drift away into her investigation. Their divorce, signed just 2 months after Hendricks was arrested, became another casualty of Sarah's death. Hendricks's wife, Dorothy, also gave a written statement. She described the horror of realizing that she had shared 42 years of marriage with a man she never truly knew. She had slept beside Sarah's killer, blind to his double life. Investigators also began reviewing 14 other cold cases in Montana, suspecting possible links to Hendricks. Parents who had trusted him as a crossing guard were left with painful questions. How many times had their children spoken to him? How many times had they waved at him from their cars, unaware they were greeting a murderer? Some families even remembered inviting Hendricks to birthday parties and school events, not knowing he was a predator hiding in plain sight. Detective Chen's investigation not only solved Sarah's case but also exposed serious flaws in hiring and background checks. As a result, the school district changed its policies, requiring psychological evaluations and stricter checks for staff. But for many families, those changes came too late. Judge Thompson sentenced Hendricks to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It brought legal closure, but the community was left to face bigger questions about how such evil could stay hidden for so long. After his conviction, the case attracted national media attention. True crime followers, podcasters, and documentary makers flooded Bozeman, turning Sarah's tragedy into content for entertainment. For the Mitchell family, it was another invasion into their grief. Sarah Mitchell's case reminds us that justice, even when it comes, doesn't erase the pain. Instead, it shows how predators can hide behind trust and respect, using their roles in society as cover for their crimes. If you followed this case from the beginning, consider subscribing to stay updated on other cold cases that deserve attention. And share your thoughts on how communities can protect themselves from people like William Hendricks, who managed to hide their true nature for decades.